We welcome you to a session about the Enneagram and social justice during this Enneagram Global Summit 2021. Our esteemed faculty member is Dr. Deborah Threadgill Egerton. Deborah is the president of Trinity Transition Consultants, an internationally respected psychotherapist. She has taken the Enneagram and the Platinum Connection out into the world. Her work is designed to empower people with new language, tools, and skills to courageously give voice to a powerful shift in consciousness. These conversations are essential for the survival of our humanity and for the continued evolution of our species. The Platinum Connection allows us to meet one another wherever we are and to begin the journey together. Deborah, I am so happy to welcome you to this vital session.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm so happy to be here today.
Well, this session is called the Enneagram in Service of Social Justice, Activating the I.D.E.A, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Anti-Racism Allies. So Deborah, can you first of all share with all of us what made you take on becoming what people are referring to as the Enneagram Jedi, where you're combining the Enneagram with social justice work? And also, what does I.D.E.A, I-D-E-A, stand for? And how does the Enneagram contribute to that process? I mean, who can get involved in that work? That's really important to hear about.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll start with the last question first, and that is everyone can get involved with I.D.E.A. But to go back to your first question, I took on the work of social justice with the Enneagram, and people started calling me the Enneagram Jedi because it is about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And from my practice and as an Enneagram practitioner, I evolved to be more of an Enneagram activist, more a person who is not so much the Enneagram scholar, but the Enneagram person who goes out into the world and uses the Enneagram for practical application, meeting people exactly where they are, being able to use language that they can hear and understand, and helping people to understand what a critical point we're at in the world, because we have so many challenges as it pertains to social justice. When we look at racism and what a horrible scourge this is on all of humanity and how it affects all of us. So organizations began calling me years ago to do what we call then DEI work, but it's gone beyond that. I.D.E.A stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism. We had to add anti-racism to this whole picture of the challenges that we're facing, because racism has so much to do with everything that we're experiencing in the realm of social justice and inequity and people being marginalized. And the Enneagram has a wonderful way of helping people to see what gets in the way when, in fact, you are actually doing things to other people that are exclusive versus inclusive, or when you are leaning into tolerance as opposed to leaning into acceptance and inclusion. So the Enneagram, if we look at how much we explore when we do our inner work, our core motivation, our basic fear, and we can see how much fear is driving so much of this behavior that is marginalizing human beings in this world. It was a natural pairing of two things, that one was a problem really to solve, and the other was a solution that we can all work within to be able to see how to begin to heal some of these wounds that are being created and continue to be created in the name of racism, bigotry, and bias.
Mm. You know, I've actually heard you say, Deborah, many times that racism will come to all of our doors. So I'm wondering if you can share for everybody why that is, why it's going to come to all of our doors, how it's impacting us. And if people decide, whatever their skin color, you know, whatever their cultural orientation is or cultural origin, if they decide to consciously participate in anti-racism, what do you help them with? What do you help them see so that they can be effective contributors to anti-racism and stop the othering that happens on this planet?
One of the most important things, Jessica, is that people begin to look inward and to recognize that it is their own wounding that contributes to racism and othering. And there is a necessity to really look at how we show up in the world and how wounded we may be and how we project our own pain onto others. What happens is that racism will come to everyone's door because we've all been set up in a way where racism is a systematic and intentional scourge on all of society. And because of the way things have been put in place that allow racism to be perpetuated, the only way that anyone can escape it is to actually face it and move through it. Now, if you're doing Enneagram work, you can actually do that. You can look at your basic fear and how that is so aligned with how you view others. Each of us, through the 9 lenses of the Enneagram, we have a different way of justifying, rationalizing our own behaviors that are so masked in our fears. We can look at our core motivation and see how we actually get things twisted and act out on other people because we're afraid, or we may think that our motivation is pushing us towards doing something that is good, but what it's actually doing in many cases is making us choose a binary choice, right, wrong, good, bad, black, white. And it takes the inner work to be able to really come out on the other side of this. Why? There's a purification of the heart and a touching of your own wounds that's required before you go near the wounds of other people. And that is why I am very intentional in this work, in working with other people to say, if you want to be an anti-racist, start with yourself first. Start with looking at the places that are broken in you, the places that are hurting in you, and actually begin to activate around healing yourself. And then your heart cracks open and you recognize that other people are being hurt and wounded in the name of racism, just like you are hurt and wounded around whatever may be going on inside of you. Hurt people hurt people. And if you are a hurting and wounded soul, as we all are, unless you're doing your inner work, you will never truly be able to get close to the pain of racism. If you try to get close to it, what happens is there's a flurry of activity and then you give up. You step away from it because it feels like it's too much. It feels like it's overwhelming. Why? Because it's connecting to something in you, because you and I are connected. We're all connected. And so if you're hurting and you're trying to work in that space, then the reality is you've got to do your own work first.
When you speak, what surfaces for me is that we have become more and more aware of the horrendous impact of even microaggressions. And it seems like developing sensitivity to these microaggressions has tremendous impact, tremendous change systemically. So in a way, it seems like you're saying that if we become aware of the microaggressions that we have, even towards other types, that's a kind of othering where they trigger us, they activate us, we project onto them, as you say, that if we can do that work of really having so worked with our own inner self and the way we microaggress against ourselves, that we can see even the subtle ways that we are hurting others just by temperament even, that this will give us the strength, the capacity, the wisdom to deal with these aggressions, these, imbalances of power, both at a macro and a micro level. And I'm wondering if you have actually witnessed in your work that when people become aware of just even the microaggressions they have against other temperaments, if that almost like brings some measure of anti-racism activity, or orientation, or whether it's still going to require, of course it will require some, but does it in a way open the door to an anti-racism orientation?
What the awareness does is it begins the awakening. And so because, as human beings or spiritual beings in human bodies, we spend so much time actually being asleep. And if we can wake up and actually recognize microaggressions, it is the beginning or the crack in the door. I wouldn't say it really opens the door, but it does create a crack in the door where you have the opportunity to either open the door wider or close it and go back to sleep. So, in response to what you're saying, Jessica, the way that I've experienced it with so many people is that the first step is education. The problem, as it stands at this moment in time and has stood historically, is that we all learned an awful lot of things that are not true. And because we have lived our lives well into adulthood for many of us, looking at a historical timeline that is sort of whitewashed, and there's no other way I can put it. There's so much of the history of people who are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, that has been left out or has been distorted. And so if we are going to work together, the first thing we have to be able to do is stand in truth. And we have to be unafraid and fearless and capable of accepting what is true. And once we accept the truth, and that requires a tremendous amount of inner work, because let's face it, who wants to admit that, wow, I've been living a lie that I have been fed from day one. And to actually even stand and look at yourself in the mirror and say, the lie must end. This must stop. We must accept the truth of the historical path of systemic racism. People have been murdered, they have been abused, we have been robbed, bullied, held back, locked in place by an intentional system. And when something is that intentional, there is only one thing that can actually bring an end to it. And it's a combination. You have to combine truth with love. Because to go forward from here and to say, okay, we're going to just do better, in some ways, that's that crack in the door. We're going to become more aware of microaggressions, macroaggressions. That's also opening the crack a little bit wider. If we're really going to look at this and do what needs to be done, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. We have to look at where this started. We have to look at how intentional this system was that's been put in place. And we have to embrace the reality of the truth. Now, Enneagram work gives us the strength to be able to do that. It gives us the strength to be able to really sit with truth and stand in truth, and then to have a response where the response, though initially, I love the saying, I think I heard it a few weeks ago, that we must accept the truth first. The truth will set you free, but it'll make you mad as hell. And yes, it will make you angry. It will make you angry. And that anger can be used in service of recognizing that the anger is righteous. But where do we go from that place? How do we use the anger in a way where we can evolve to a loving response, which would be, I'm going to get engaged. I'm going to educate myself. I'm going to educate my friends. I'm not going to sit by and let people say things that are hurtful, insulting, that are harmful to people of color. I'm going to be an ally. Now, I have to get this in here. No human being has the right to actually identify themselves as an ally. If you are my ally, I will tell you you are my ally. Mm-hmm. It's not a moniker that you can pick up and put on yourself, because we have a lot of people running around claiming to be allies that are perhaps well-intentioned, but doing more harm than good. And if you are truly an ally, then you are going to engage in the activities that you need to engage in around the education process, looking at the painful past and allowing yourself to embrace the reality of the truth of that. And then finally, stepping into a space where you change your behavior, you look at your behavioral patterns that you've learned to identify based on your Enneagram behavioral pattern. And then you can actually begin to approach people who will see that your actions are that of an ally. And then we will say, yes, you are my ally.
So Deborah, these words are searing. They're devastating. They are rousing. They are a call to the arms of love. And all of these topics, all of the things you speak about, you know, the murders, the harm, the inequity, the ways that we all lose because of this throughout time. And yet, that's enough. That's enough to just, and there's so many powerful lenses that people activate and engage, those questions, the need for evolution, all of that. And yet for you, the Enneagram has become literally integral to the whole process. And so I'm wondering if you could speak, and so you've spoken eloquently about how the ability of how we learn to be present to our own blind spots strengthens us for the engagement with the need for systemic response, anti-racism, to change the whole system. With the specifics of the Enneagram, what else goes into this? Like, is it about the 3 centers? Is it about the 9 points on the Enneagram? And I think that you could speak about that both in terms of our own inner development and presence and contribution, and also in terms of becoming allies.
It is definitely about everything that the Enneagram has to offer to us. And we can start with the 3 centers. This work is impossible without the activation of our 3 centers of intelligence. If we are going to heal our own wounds, then we have to be aware of where that wounding may have taken place. We have to be aware of where it is in our bodies. With people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, we have been wounded so much in the body center that in terms of even inhabiting the body, and I'd like to explain this to people, being in your body as a person of color can be frightening because you never know when the body is going to be attacked. And I will speak from my own experience. I do live with that fear. I live with a fear of what may happen to my own body or the body of my husband or my children or my grandchildren or my brother. This is a natural response to a lifetime of trauma. And every time the attempt is made to heal the wounds, something happens that re-traumatizes any of us who actually are people who live in bodies of color. We see it every day. We experience it every day. But without doing the inner work and constantly doing the healing work, it is impossible to really show up fully as a human being and to self-actualize and to actually be able to fully be who we were created to be. And so the work of activating and being aware and being in our bodies is critical. It's crucial to our survival. It's the only way that we can be in the world. On the other side of that, our allies and advocates need to also be in their bodies to recognize how this is affecting them as well. If you're an ally and an advocate and you're working towards being a true anti-racist and being a true person who steps away from anything that even has that taste or texture of bigotry, then being aware of where that lives in your body is something that you have to discover. And you have to look for it because it is there. The unconscious bias that we all harbor is there. And we can find it and surface it if we're willing to look for it. So being activated in the body center is a crucial first step. And then I look at the heart center and how important that is, because the hearts of those of us who are categorized as others. This starts so very early on. We recognize that othering happens if you do not belong, not a member of the dominant culture. And so is it heartbreaking? Absolutely. It is heartbreaking to feel excluded, to not be included, and to walk around with a heart that feels the wounds of not being accepted as you are. To see the pain that is inflicted on you and your people and not always be able to stop it. To see humanity's inhumanity to their fellow humans is a rupture of the heart. It says, my heart says, how can you do this? And how can I live through this? How can I take this? How can I bear it? So it is going up into my heart space and accessing the grace to heal my heart, to know that if I am going to heal, I am going to actually embrace love. I'm going to pull the love in where I find it. And when I know that it is unique and it is authentic and it is really coming towards me, then I can hold that love. But first, I have to learn how to love myself, because the world has told me I am an other. You might as well say I'm an alien. I don't belong on this planet. So the healing of my own heart and my own heartbreak is intense work. And it is work that I personally do every day, and that I teach Black, Indigenous, people of color, and all marginalized people to participate in the healing of the heart of your own wounds. If you're on the ally and the advocate side of this, your heart is broken as well. You just may not know it, because we're connected. What is done to me, you have also done to yourself. I was looking at an article just a couple of days ago, and there was some words in there about how do the grandchildren of the people who threw rocks at Black children trying to go to school for the first time feel about their grandchildren knowing that they were the people that threw the rocks. Racism will come to your door. This stuff comes back. So if you were living in the 50s or the 60s and you were one of the people that was a participant, or any member of your family was a participant in these types of actions, and your grandchildren are now looking at you and saying, did you really do that? That's heartbreaking. That is heartbreaking. I have had so many conversations with the children of my peers who have asked me to help them explain to their children why they, as white people, did not teach their children about racism. That's powerful. That white people who are trying to become allies are now coming to me and saying, how do I have this conversation with my adult children who are looking at me and saying, Mom, Dad, you never said a word to me about racism. or about how other people were treated in this world. If we do not have something like the Enneagram to help us heal those wounds of the heart, you can't just sit and think about it. You really have to go deep inside and own the things that you have done wrong or that have happened in the past that are part of our collective history. If you are a recipient of that type of behavior and you're still seeing and feeling the pain of the everyday experiences of being a person who is not white-bodied, the power of just sitting in your heart space and asking for the grace to heal. The power of sitting in your heart space and saying, I am whole, I am good, I am loved, I will survive. I am loved by a higher source than anything that is around me, and I can stand in this space as a fully whole and healed human being with a whole heart. My heart will not shatter every time I walk out the door. So it's intentional work, and it's work that we have to do on a daily basis. And then the activation in the head center. When I say educate yourself, educate, educate, educate. Do not be afraid of the truth on either side of this. As a person of color, the truth is terrifying. It's terrifying. There are places that I have not yet allowed myself to go. I know that I have to go to the lynching museum in Alabama, and I have some deep trauma that is connected to Alabama because that's where my mother was from. And yet, even when I see the pictures of the lynching museum, it's like I can't process it. I cannot process it. I cannot make myself yet get on a plane and go to the lynching museum. I have been able to do many other things. I can stand in the pain of what is happening today and look right at it and say, no more, not on my watch. No one else must die. No one else must die. My head forms those words, but they drop into my heart and they activate in my body. And for allies, when you say to me, I can't look at that stuff, I won't watch those movies about what they used to do to Black people, they're horrible, I won't look at them. You need to look at them. You need to look at them, and you need to recognize the depth of the pain that has been imposed on a suffering people. You need to read the actual history, starting from Jamestown and evolving all the way to Black Lives Matter today. You need to look at and unearth the truth of how the suffering was intentionally designed and how it remains to be in place today. And that you can take in with your head. But if you do not filter it and let it drop down into your heart, and you do not activate in your body, then don't call yourself an ally. because you have not yet become one. It takes work, deep, hard, intentional work. If you are marginalized, it takes the work to heal. If you are from the dominant culture, it takes the work to heal. If you are marginalized, it takes the work to stand again and accept that you are whole and worthy. If you are from the dominant culture, it takes the work to accept your connection to all of this suffering. So the activation of the three centers, if you're just taking stuff in with your head, good, you're doing a lot of reading, but you know what? You're reading and then you're closing the book and then you're going to your refrigerator, you're making your meal, you're going to bed in the comfort of your home, and it does nothing to end the suffering. You've just read a good book. If it doesn't touch your heart, then read some more. My suggestions, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, Isabel Wilkerson's Cast. These are books that give you a real idea of what is going on. And I actually had the wonderful experience of just reading it through the lens of my Enneagram oneness and seeing how that landed in all three centers for me. Each Enneagram type, and I don't like to use the word type so much, but each Enneagram pattern that we act out, the one that's dominant, the one that leads, wanders its way through this information and has some ways of justifying bad behavior, but also has some ways of cracking open and becoming more responsive and becoming more capable of dealing with, embracing, and working with the truth. But none of this will happen on either side of the equation without grace, without love, and without acceptance of the truth.
And Deborah, I can't imagine that everybody who's listening isn't profoundly impacted by the words you're speaking. And I'm wondering if, in addition to the compelling charge that you've issued, that all of us need to do this three-centered inner work, whatever our history and orientation is. I'm wondering if part of the remedy, shall we say, or the transformation is also people who have some privilege and some power being willing to use their power and platform to even give it, to kind of give it, to be generous with it, to build steps in a sense for everybody. Because as you were speaking, like Between Me and the World, Baltimore, I'm here in Baltimore where he's lived, and there's an incredible museum here that I think everyone on the planet should come see. You, I'm sure, know it too, the Great Blacks in Wax Museum. And like the Lynching Museum, it is like, it will shake you and rock you to your core to go in there. And yet it's been stewarded by this couple, they literally on hand to, like little tiny contributions, this treasure. Meanwhile, we have 3 or 4 other amazing museums in the city of Baltimore, fantastic museums, including the American Visionary Arts Museum, but they get funded. And here's this other place that is struggling when it is literally a game changer. And so it just makes me ask the question, does it also take people of privilege being willing to use their money, their power, their platform to empower these other things? And I'm wondering, if I may, just one of the wounds that may go with that is I've known so many people of every skin color, white, brown, black, who have described lifelong pain that they hold because they loved a friend of another color or were in love with a person of another color and felt too ashamed from a certain era, like they were separated from friends and lovers because they couldn't live out safely. This is white and black and brown. So this whole thing of allies that you keep saying, and how do we get that people to feel safe enough to use their power and their money and their privilege to fund this incredible museum and to do all the things that would need to be done? Doesn't that also require some healing that may have happened to their hearts in losing friends and loved ones because of race?
Absolutely. I want to back up a little bit just around the word privilege, because we know that that word can be very triggering to many white people. Privilege is, and particularly white privilege, is being able to move really unencumbered through the world without people asking you, do you belong here? Why are you in this section of the department store? Excuse me, but what are you doing sitting in first class? I've had it happen to me where I'm sitting in first class and I'll get up to go to the restroom and I will be told that my restroom is at the back of the plane, okay? And I'm seated in first class. So I'm not seen, this is so important, I'm not seen sitting in the first class seat. But if I get up to go to the restroom in first class, and God forbid my husband, who is browner than I am, gets up to go to the restroom in first class, we're always told that our restroom is in the back of the plane.
Oh my God.
This is just, this is something I've come to expect from flying. Fortunately, I'm very well versed in being able to handle these situations. But I cannot say to you that it does not put a little tear in my heart every time it happens. And what I want to explain to people who are white-bodied is that it is a privilege that people who are not white-bodied do not have, to not be questioned about whether or not you belong. That is a very simple explanation. And to be questioned as to whether or not you belong, going to the restroom in first class, turning left or turning right if you go into the airport and you're going into the lounge. There's a luxury lounge that if you're flying out of the country, you go into, and then there's the regular lounge. And if you get ready to turn left, you're stopped. Getting seated either by the bathroom or by the workstation in restaurants. These are daily occurrences. Anyone who, is in the category of BIPOC can share this with you. And there are other things. I like for people to be able to make the connection. I'm sure, Jessica, you can make the connection in ways where you've been marginalized as a woman, okay? You'll hear your words picked up by a man and they're heard, but you asked that question 30 minutes ago. So it happens. We have to look at how this is just part of what is just ingrained in our being. And if we don't do the inner work to get it out, it will continue and it will destroy us. But for allies who have privilege, or people who have privilege and want to be allies, like I said, that first step is the education, because you are not going to be able to sustain your efforts as an ally when people come up against you unless you're standing in truth. You'll just kind of want to back away from it because you're getting too many family members that are criticizing you, too many of your friends that don't know why you're on this soapbox about, people who are marginalized, or why you're trying to be an anti-racist. You have to be standing in truth. So this piece around understanding why you are activating as an ally or as an advocate against racism, it's so important to understand yourself why you're doing it. It can't come from a place of pity. It cannot come from a place of shame, blame, or guilt. It has to come from a place of integrity, spoken from the one, a place of standing in the integrity of helping humanity to evolve based on bringing equity. That's why it used to be diversity and inclusion work, but now it's diversity, equity, inclusion work, and anti-racism. We've got to bring equity to the table. We've got to fill in these gaps, these holes of the things that have been torn down for so long. It's the privilege of becoming an ally and an advocate is actually the privilege of becoming a real human being. That's what it's about. If you have privilege, do you want to be an authentic human who actually stands for all of humanity? Or do you actually want to be a marginalized human being who has marginalized, you've marginalized yourself when you don't choose to use your privilege to bring equity and equality across the board? So yes, there are ways that the allies, as identified by people who are marginalized, when a person looks at you and says, you know what, you're an ally, like I looked at you in 2016 and said, what the hell? There's a white woman standing behind me, backing me up. And it's Jessica Dibb. I'll never forget that. That was a powerful moment, and that's where we connected. But for people who are hearing this, if it is in your heart to recognize that the people who are marginalized are not going to end marginalization, we're going to get tired of it. We've been long past tired of it, and our voices are speaking up and becoming louder. And there is a place for the anger, but we have to know how to use that anger, and we have to use it in the service of love, because anger and hatred are really, I call them two gangsters that hang out, and anger and hatred hang out with a third member of their gang, which is fear, and all of those things are harmful. But when we look at that mixture and we begin to neutralize it with the alchemy of love, when we recognize that we have to love ourselves, we have to learn how to love each other, we have to recognize that we have more similarities than we have differences, but do not ask our differences to go away in order to make you comfortable. Our differences are part of who we are and who we were made to be. None of us has the right to ask our Creator to make us something other than who we are. And this is something that we have struggled with throughout time, which is if you don't know how to fit into a white world, you won't be successful. You won't survive, or you won't thrive. We need to relook at that. I'm not willing to change who I am to fit into a different mold than the one that my Creator cast me in. And if people can begin to take that in, and you can't take it in without doing inner work. You cannot take that in without doing inner work because it is counterintuitive. It's why not? If we all blend in together, then we'll be able to get along. No, that's not necessary. What is necessary is that we all learn to respect one another. So doing the deep work of learning to respect all of your fellow man. Father Richard Rohr wrote something in the Universal Christ when he said, you know, there's a reason that the Buddha has their eyes closed and the Christ always is seen with his eyes open. So in Eastern traditions, we go inner, we go in, but sometimes in the Eastern traditions, it hasn't been the strong suit of coming out with it. The Enneagram follows much of the work of the Eastern tradition when we do our inner work. But the outer work with our eyes open also has to come. It has to come. We go in, we do our inner work, we open our eyes, we come out into the world, transformed, enlightened, and willing to serve.
I can imagine that there are so many people listening to this session, Deborah, who are wondering, how can they do some of this inner work with you? Are there some things coming up that people could plug into?
Absolutely, Jessica. I will be teaching at Esalen. Hopefully, it will not only be a live workshop, but also there will be a recorded version of it. And that will be Martin Luther King's birthday weekend, January 14 to 17. And I'm doing a workshop there to help allies and advocates to do the healing work, to be able to transform and activate and come out as Enneagram activists. And I also will be, once again, having the cohort to go through for the Enneagram and I.D.E.A work, inclusion, diversity, equity, and anti-racism certification with the I.D.E.A, and that course will run for 6 months. And that will be starting up again very soon, but they can find that on my website, deboraheggerton.com.
Deborah, it is an honor and a privilege for me to be able to stand behind you. And I am so happy that you and I have the Enneagram to guide us in our inner work so that we have felt the strength and the advocacy for our connection, and that we have not been separated out of shame or fear. And I deeply look forward to this ongoing journey and adventure with you for the rest of my life.
As do I with you, Jessica. I want to say that there comes a point where an ally transforms into an advocate. And the key words that you used there when you said, I'm proud to stand behind you. A true advocate pushes the people and the voices that have been marginalized forward. And that's what advocacy is. It's not talking for us, it's allowing our voices to be heard. And Jessica, you've done that and you continue to do that. So I thank you.
I'm speechless, and believe me, I am the recipient of the bounty of this fount of wisdom that comes forth from you, Deborah. Thank you on behalf of the whole world.